The following is taken from the course Build an AI Plant Identification App, which is on nocode.mba.
Although we're using Firebase exclusively in this course, I do want you to be aware that there are alternative backends as a service that you can use, such as Xano, Supabase, and Buildship. These kinds of products are known as backend as a service. And Supabase gets special mention here because Supabase is a very popular alternative to Firebase and it has a high level of integration with FlutterFlow. So when starting a FlutterFlow project, it is a good idea to do some research and see if there's another backend as a service that might suit you better. It's also possible to use traditional coding languages and frameworks such as Python or PHP. This is a traditional backend. And you can also integrate FlutterFlow with a traditional backend using API calls, as you would with a normal Flutter application. Now, within Firebase, there are various different services, and we'll be using these services in this course. The first one is Firebase Authentication, and this is for user management and security. Then we have Cloud Firestore, and this serves as our database. Cloud Storage, also known as Firebase Storage, is where we hold all of our user-generated media and images. In this course, this will just be images, but you can also upload things like videos and files to Cloud Storage. Then we have Cloud Functions, and this is for various logical operations. It's essentially for just running any kind of code. And some code should be run on the back end rather than on the front end. Certain kinds of business logic and connections to third-party services. And then there's Firebase Cloud Messaging, or FCM, and this will be handling push notifications. Now we'll turn on these Firebase services, so please follow along from this point on. There should be a button in the Firebase section that says Enable Auth on Firebase. We just need to click this, and it will take us to the Firebase console. If for any reason you don't have this button, you can just go straight to Firebase and find authentication from the All Product section here. Getting started with authentication is perfectly simple. You just hit the Get Started button, and you'll have various options for signing in. In this course, we're going to use email password and also Google sign in. So first go ahead and click email password and click enable and save. Also go to add new provider, click Google, click enable. You'll need to add an email address and click save. Great, authentication is now enabled. Back in the Firebase console, we'll also want to enable storage on Firebase. Same process here, just click Get Started. Now there are two choices here. We can start in production mode or we can start in test mode for setting up rules for cloud storage. In this case, we'll choose production mode and click Next. And you can click Done. Great, so now we have storage set up as well. The other thing that we want to make sure is set up is your Firestore database. Again, you can find this in all products if it doesn't show up in the project shortcuts. FlutterFlow has actually already initialized my database for me, but if not, it's the same process. You just click Get Started. So we can close out of this, back to FlutterFlow. At this point, we can click Generate Config Files, and this will do some magic in the background as FlutterFlow interacts with Firebase. These configuration files can be regenerated at any time, and it may be that you need to do this a few times throughout the project's lifecycle. Now, even though we set up Firebase storage, we also need to deploy it from FlutterFlow, so we'll do that here. Just need to click Deploy, easy as that. The next thing we need to do is make sure that authentication is turned on. So if it's turned off, then you just need to turn it back on again, make sure the authentication type is Firebase, and we'll be setting the initial pages later, so don't worry about that too much for now. Finally, we want to initialize Firestore. Firestore doesn't appear in this menu. It actually appears as its own setting up here. So go ahead and click that. Note that on the top left, you can manage the data and the fields yourself, which we'll be going into a bit later in the course. But also make sure that you note the settings cog up here, because there are more settings in here that we need to deploy. First will be the Firestore rules. Now later on, we're going to have other collections and we'll go a bit deeper into Firestore rules. For now, we just have this users collection. Incidentally, if this users collection doesn't happen to be here, that's okay. All you need to do is click the database icon here and add a new collection and call it users. If you do this, then FlutterFlow will automatically pick up that this is a users collection and do the right thing with it. So we'll head back to settings. We need to create some rules for these users. For now, simply select authenticated users, for all of the operations create, read, write, and for delete, you want to go for no one. This may already be set up for you depending on the order in which you set things up originally. And again, I'll go through what all of this means a little bit later in the course. But for now, we can just hit deploy. And deploy now. In addition, we'll go ahead and deploy delete user references. Okay, now we've hit our first error. It's important to understand when working in a FlutterFlow project that you will encounter errors. This is a very common thing when creating mobile applications and any kind of software in general. Very often when you hit an error, the error will actually just be explained to you. So let's see what this error is. What we can do in FlutterFlow is we can hover over the information icon and see what the error says. Your Firebase project must be on the Blaze plan in order to deploy functions. Please upgrade your plan and deploy again. Now, if you read through the FlutterFlow documentation, what you'll realize is that to deploy functions, which is one of the services that I've mentioned in Firebase, you need to be on what's called the Blaze plan. Now, this is nothing to do with FlutterFlow. It's a Firebase thing, and it's to do with what you're permitted to do on certain tiers. We haven't provided a credit card to Firebase yet, and you can do certain things with Firebase without a credit card. But to go any further with FlutterFlow, we're unfortunately going to need to set up a payment profile. However, the free tier with Firebase is actually the same whether you're on the Spark or on the Blaze plan. So when we upgrade to the Blaze plan, we won't actually need to pay anything, and we will have the same free tier limits as if we were on the Spark plan. Okay, so it's time to head over to the Firebase console, and let's take the opportunity to have a look around and see what FlutterFlow has actually done here. So at the very top, you can go to your project overview. This will show you a few things about performance metrics and what different services that you can use. We also can go to our authentication, our storage, our Firestore database. And generally speaking, if there's a service that we want, just go to all products. And there are actually quite a lot of Firestore products that we won't be covering in this course, but that can be very, very useful, such as app check, app hosting. There are other kinds of databases. There are machine learning services in here. So it's definitely worth having a look at Firebase and seeing what it offers. As I said before, in this course, the services that we're going to be using are Cloud Functions, Firestore database, authentication, and also storage. For the Firestore database, we'll find the data in here as soon as we start creating data. We have no data just yet. We also have these rules. I'm going to go into this in more detail in a little bit. But this was actually deployed from FlutterFlow when we pressed the deploy button for rules. And when I added the authenticated users rule while I did this, it set up this, which creates certain permissions for authenticated users. Now let's head up to our project settings. That's this little gear icon here. You can add users, you can go to your settings, and you can have a look at your usage and billing with this. This is our project ID, our project name. These are things that we set up from FlutterFlow. And one thing that FlutterFlow has done, which is really cool, and this is actually quite recent, I used to have to do this by myself, and it was a bit of a pain to set up. FlutterFlow is creating an Android, an iOS, and a web application within Firebase. These applications manage things like credentials and push notification settings. And they're absolutely essential for these mobile applications that we're going to build. And it's really cool that FlutterFlow has just created them for us. This includes, for example, something called a SHA-1 key, which is required for sign-in with Google to work. If FlutterFlow hadn't done this for us, we would have to use a terminal, install Android Studio, and various other things. So it's really, really useful that it gets done for us. But if these apps are missing for any reason, you can figure out how to set them up by using the FlutterFlow documentation. And note that something that's possible here is also a web application, because Firebase is a backend as a service, and that means that it's not directly tied to the App Store or to Google Play. We can also use Firebase on the web. And so we can use the web for things like testing our authentication, or for creating an administration panel that can administer our app. Anything we want to do, Firebase will allow it. It's just a backend, and it can plug into different kinds of front ends. Let's also take a look at the users and permissions. Now, again, this is something that I had to do myself quite recently, so it's really nice that FlutterFlow seems to have started to take care of this for you during the setup process. It adds this user called Firebase at flutterflow.io. And this actually dives into the Google Cloud Platform infrastructure itself and sets up roles that it needs to set up in order for FlutterFlow to be authenticated to create cloud functions, which control a lot of the things that FlutterFlow does under the hood. You can also add other members to your project here by using the Add Member button. Now, we need to upgrade our project, and we do that down here with the upgrade button. We're currently on the Spark plan, which doesn't require a credit card or anything like that. The Blaze plan does require a billing account, and so you will need to set one up to continue from this point. But as I said before, this won't actually cost any money because everything that we do in this course will be well within the free tier of Firebase. Now, I already have a billing account set up. It will give you the option to set up a billing account if you need to do this. You can also set a budget, and I like to set this very low at maybe €5. This is so that if any billing at all starts to happen, it's probably because I made a mistake. And so Firebase will tell you, hey, you just spent €5. And I'll think, oh my God, I must have set something up that I didn't mean to set up, so I can get in here and rectify the problem before I spend more than $5. But of course, this could be 50 cents if you prefer. Okay, now we're on the Blaze plan, so let's go. And if you do have any extra concerns about cost and where the free tier is with Firebase, you can have a look at firebase.google.com/pricing. And here they actually have a calculator and they show you where the free tier starts. So for example, for the Firestore database, we get 1.5 million reads per month, which is a lot. So unfortunately, we're still getting an error with the delete user references. And this happens from time to time. FlutterFlow is no longer helping us though by giving us the error message, which is unfortunate. So we're going to have to try a few things out. This particular issue is related to users. We know this because we're trying to deploy a job whereby if a user is deleted, its documents will also be deleted. But one thing I'm realizing is this is the user's collection. We're going to select which collection new users will be added to when an account's created. This is off. Probably would help to turn it on and set it to the user's collection. Okay, let's see if that makes any difference. Okay, perfect. That's what the problem was. And I suppose hindsight is 2020. Turning on the user's collection is definitely going to help deleting with user references. But I wanted to show you this process because getting through an entire FlutterFlow project without an error is probably an unreasonable expectation. You'll encounter errors somewhere here and there, and it's likely that throughout the course you'll see errors on your screen that don't happen on my screen. The important thing is to stay calm and think logically through the error. Very often there's going to be a message that explains the problem. If not, I'll show you some resources later in the course that you can use to help debug a FlutterFlow project. Okay, next we're going to validate the Firebase schema. This compares the schema that we have in Firebase to the schema that we have in FlutterFlow. So we just have to click validate. Perfect. That validation was successful. So now our Firestore database is set up correctly.
Thank you for watching. If you want to take the full course on how to build an app on FlutterFlow and also get access to many other no-code tutorials, go to nocode.mba.